Adolescence is a time in development that is most known for the importance of peer interaction and social stimuli. There's a transition from being reliant on parents, for example, or adult guardians, and your identity being in who they say that you are or what they think of you. And that shifts during adolescence to being more about peer acceptance. Because of COVID-19, social interaction and engagement with peers drastically decreased as a measure of social distancing. In addition to obviously all of the hormonal and biological changes that are happening in adolescence, there's also profound psychological and mental changes that are going on. You see an increased impact of peer recognition, of rejection, of loneliness. Everything is sort of heightened during this transition period that we call adolescence. Adolescence is a time in life where young people are supposed to be able to branch out, to experience new things, to make new mistakes in order to learn and grow from them and become the person they hope to be in later in life. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, for a lot of people, it felt like those opportunities were no longer available. A lot of what it meant to branch out, to experience new things, could no longer happen because you were confined to your home. The CDC found that the proportion of mental health related hospital visits between people of the age 12 to 17 increased by 31% during the pandemic. The American Academy of Pediatrics found that in individuals aged 11 to 21, mental health related hospital visits, as well as suicidal ideations and even suicide attempts, rose significantly during the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to pure statistics, let's see what teenagers and psychologists have to say.
My name is Dr. Stuart Ablon. I am a clinical psychologist and I direct a program called Think Kids in the Department of Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital, and I'm on the faculty at Harvard Medical School as well. You know, the teenage brain is still rapidly changing, not as much as earlier on in childhood, but there's a lot of change and development still occurring in the teenage brain. And a lot of the type of development that's occurring is also specific to challenges that teenagers, adolescents have with sort of asserting themselves in the world and carving out a place for themselves as individuals. The pandemic has introduced a level of chronic stress and isolation to everybody. And, the thing about chronic stress is it gets in the way of both our development of our skills and our ability to apply the skills that we've already developed. So here you have, during adolescents are still sort of learning a lot and developing rapidly skills related to things like problem solving and frustration tolerance and flexibility and things like that. And then you get hit with these huge demands for those skills and chronic stressors, and it makes it hard to display those skills and to sort of further your development of them. So in essence, it can lead to sort of all of us getting a bit stuck where we are, if you will.
Right.
So my name is Shub Agarwal, and I'm a school counselor at Worcester Academy, which is an independent school in Worcester. The prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain, right? The front of our part of our brain, it is involved with executive functioning, gets involved with decision-making, organization, and that piece of our brain is still developing until we're kind of in our late 20s. And so a lot of adults can kind of, I think, for teenagers, it kind of you're starting to be able to handle abstract thoughts and handle a lot of really complicated things, and there's still pieces of it that are still developing.
So I'm Dr. Nancy Rappaport, and I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist, although I like to just call myself a family psychiatrist because I feel like oftentimes kids are the identified patient, but it's really the family that you want to work with. And I am a part-time associate professor in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, and I've worked for 20 years. I worked in a school-based health center, a teen health center, based in a public high school, Cambridge Interlochen High School. And I have worked for over 23 years with public schools. And I've written 2 books, and one one book was called The Behavior Code, which was really trying to keep teachers working in public sector, working in public schools, because we lose 25% of teachers in the first 5 years of their teaching experience. So I wanted to give them information that they can use that day working with kids. And then I wrote a memoir, and I did an off Broadway play that I wrote called Regeneration. I really like adolescence because I love, my favorite folks to deal with are kids who are raising hell, that are sort of like piss and vinegar, kind of like don't mess with me, and I'm a rebel of the world. Because I think they're actually, the flip side of them is incredible optimism. And part of the reason why they're so angry is because, or if they're being pissed off, is because they're saying, this is not, whatever I'm dealing with, whether it's poverty, a dead parent, an alcoholic parent, materialistic parents, whatever, I am rebelling against that.
Yeah,
So,
like you're saying, it's sort of tied into optimism because you're sort of able to see that these, traumas or things that have happened to me aren't fair, and that that's not how the world is supposed to look.
yeah, and it's a woman named Judy Cohen who talks about, both you want to learn skills to manage the stress, and you also want to tell the story. And telling the story is a really healing part, because when trauma happens, and certainly the pandemic is a trauma event, things get fragmented. And so part of telling a story is building cohesion. So there was a real dystopia going on for people. So, and then I talk about this term called ambiguous loss, which is a term that describes the idea, say when you have someone with Alzheimer's disease, they're physically present, but they're not there. And there was a lot of that happening for teenagers. Like, well, we're going to have school, sort of, you're going to have virtual school, which can usually be incredibly boring and hard to engage in, but that's school, even though we've now not, and you're supposedly having social contact because you're on social media, but nobody wanted to usurp personal contact with social media. So that's what ambiguous loss is. It's this sort of thing where you can't, and it happened in multiple arenas. So that, I think, was one thing that was, super stressful for people, was all these sort of half losses. It wasn't like you said, okay, school's over, and now I get to make a documentary for the next year. It's like, you're going to have to take algebra remotely and not see your friends. And if you had any extracurricular activity, that's not really happening. But, and that's a lot of grief. That's a lot of mourning. And it's a lot more than many teenagers end up having. I mean, we're in a historic time. This is once in 100 years. And you got to be the teenagers that moved through it. But the isolation's a lot. It's a lot for teenagers. It's a lot of time to be with your family, even if you love your family. And a lot of teenagers aren't in love with their family. They, there's something about wanting autonomy and not being in the same house and not having people overhear your phone calls, and not having, even if you're not an intrusive parent, you're still stepping into each other's business all the time. So that's been a really unnatural thing that, even if you got your license, you didn't have anywhere to drive to. So that's, those are the challenges, that you stayed home for a year or more sometimes. And I mean, now we have the vaccine, but we didn't know at the time. And I was like, that's really nice of you, because you probably wouldn't have been that sick if you'd gotten COVID, but you made that sacrifice for people older than you. One of the things I would think about with anger is the tip of the iceberg. And so oftentimes underneath that anger is, and again, I have in my PowerPoint, I have a picture of anger, and then like 25 different feelings: guilt, remorse, and so I would sort of encourage teenagers who are saying they're angry. I would wonder if that's their go-to, and that instead of feeling sad and grieving about the fact that they lost a year in their life, which is no question. I mean, when you graduate, it's probably a crapshoot whether you're going to whether you'll actually have a graduation that's physical. That's those rituals, senior prom, gone, you know, or if it isn't, I mean, like what, and you know, so I think I often talk about the both yes and, like, maybe you can't have a prom, but you could, you know, I don't know, have you know, do something. I don't know even how to make up something, but that sort of idea that making room for both. Like, there was maybe more time that I had with my family, and I really feel like I got to know my parents in a different way, and I can't wait to get the hell to college. You know, that holding both things and making room for both feelings, and understanding that there's a sort of tension and contradiction with it. And I'm still learning that now, but I find when you do that, you can let go a little bit of the anger, you know.
My name is Kim Yeager, and I am the school psychologist at BASIS DC. I've been a school psychologist for almost, I think, like 10 years now, maybe 11 years, which is crazy. And I've always worked in DC. I've worked in a few different settings. I've primarily worked east of the river, and now I am here at BASIS. So I do a few different things in my role. Primarily, I support students with disabilities here at BASIS through either special education services or maybe via their 504 plans. I provide counseling support, kind of emotional support for those students. And I also do evaluations, so determining kind of what kids may need services and helping to develop the support plans for them. So in middle school, you know, people are really kind of finding out who they are as young people, kind of forming their identity. You know, when we're really young, a lot of our identity is tied up with our families, our parents, and kind of who we are sort of depends on sort of what they think we are. And as we approach adolescence, we're really forming our own sense of self, exploring different parts of ourselves, forging our independence and kind of figuring things out, which is really exciting to see as a school psychologist. Our younger selves are very tied up with, you know, our family life, kind of our parents' ideas of who we are, again, that family acceptance. And as we approach adolescence, our peers become our biggest, you know, influencers, and a lot of our identity is tied into our peer group. So as the pandemic hit, we really took away, you know, peers from adolescence, you know, at least in person. And so I think, you know, the social isolation has been arguably, you know, one of the toughest things for kids. I think, you know, I've seen kind of waves and stages of adolescents sort of dealing with the pandemic. I think first, you know, there was a lot of fear and uncertainty, and that sort of has, you know, kind of transformed into over time as this just general like malaise, just like, I think, and I see a lot more just sort of apathy and just like, you know, withdrawal and things like that. It's been really hard to take, you know, kids away from their peer groups.
Yeah, I like to describe it as sort of existential exhaustion,
Yes.
where you're just so, it's not that you're, you know, physically tired. It's just that you're so tired of the situation, of everything that's going on. And also there's a certain amount of sort of powerlessness where there's not a whole lot you individually can do to stop it or to fix it.
Yeah.
And that can obviously get super frustrating.
Yes. You know, what we do know obviously is that there's been a rise in mental health, you know, diagnoses and concerns among adolescents. So things like depression and anxiety. And what we know with depression is, you know, often that's associated with a lot of sort of withdrawal and a lot of maybe disinterest from things that kids are normally interested in. So, you know, are students really thinking a lot about preparing for the next steps in their future, or are they just like really disengaged and apathetic? And how is that going to impact sort of the next step and the next stage? I think about that a lot. You know, are these kids going to be academically prepared? You know, maybe just some of the anxiety that has crept in, and now going from sitting at home all day to a complete, especially students in your age group, we're asking you to be basically confined at home with your families, and then but hopefully potentially moving out, right? In some cases, maybe moving across the country to go to school. And that's a huge developmental transition. And losing a lot of your independence, how is that going to set you up for feeling confident in your ability to sort of tackle that next stage of life? I think that's something that is going to be interesting to see play out. So what we know about something like depression is that you can mitigate a lot of depression through what we call like protective factors, right? So if you think about your life on a scale, right? You have risk factors and you have protective factors. And the more risk factors you have in your life, like stress, maybe, some problems within your family, financial troubles, right? Like those things increase your risk of depression. But what we also know is that protective factors, like having a really supportive teacher at school, or being engaged in an activity that you love, being in counseling, things like that, help tip the scale so that ideally you want more protective factors than risk factors, or at least some sort of balance. So what I've seen is the pandemic has really made the scale go like this. They've taken away a lot of students' protective factors. So, students who are really into sports, maybe team sports, they've lost their ability to engage in that. A lot of different types of activities that students love, the things that really just like spark like joy within them, we've taken that away. Mental health services have been more challenging, to come across. There's often huge wait lists for to see a counselor. Sometimes they're done virtually, which, is the kind of the best we can do in many circumstances. A lot of families are going through financial hardships, right? I think like we've tipped the scale where it's harder to have a sort of a more kind of balance there. I think even within myself, like it's important to acknowledge that, right? To honor those feelings of it's grief, right? Like losing a graduation, losing a prom, losing a lot of these big like milestones within life, like it's a form of grief. And I think that's not to be dismissed. And I think, again, not dismissing those feelings and honoring those feelings, and having, I think, adolescents understand that you can feel really, really crummy about that, and also feel grateful at the same time that you are safe. Your family is hopefully safe, and you have, been okay throughout, this pandemic. Like those,
they're not mutually exclusive.
Exactly. They're not mutually exclusive. And so I think when we tell, adolescents like, oh, like stop whining, like you're fine, right? Like you have all of these resources, you have Netflix, you have this, you have that. I think, that's not giving credit to those big feelings of grief that I think a lot of students are also feeling. And I think, we need to, what we know about emotion is that it has to be, there's no bad emotion, right? Your emotions, your feelings are your feelings. And we need to, everyone needs to process that feeling and honor that feeling in order for, to do itself justice, or else, we don't really handle that properly, and it'll manifest in other ways later down our lives. But our ability to kind of manage all of our emotions, to process situations, to lead a healthy life, at the foundation of a lot of that are some basic things like sleep and like good nutrition. And I think we're at times often ignoring some of those basic, again, foundational elements to kind of living a happy life and having good mental health. We can't have, happiness and social fulfillment and be able to process our emotions without some of those basic things. So if I had to give adolescents one piece of advice, it would be to practice good sleep hygiene and to sleep.
For teenagers to help themselves, I would say prioritize your mental health, prioritize your just health in general. Teenagers are much more capable of taking care of themselves than I think a lot of us give them credit to do sometimes. I think we kind of, again, I think you mentioned this earlier, that teenagers are stuck in this like really hard space where they're seen as kids sometimes, and they're seen as adults sometimes. So I think if you feel capable in handling your own how to manage social distance guidelines. If you can take care of just wearing a mask every day, that's wonderful, right? And that's going to make a huge impact on like this whole the way that we navigate the world. But teenagers, I would say to you, like, find coping skills that work for you. Find things that you like that bring you, comfort and work when you're stressed out, and continue to do those things. And also see if you can introduce them to your family. I think teenagers can be a really wonderful kind of catalyst at home to start new ideas and habits. And so if that's something that you feel like you can do and still balance your whole life, great. That's something fun. Just be okay with like big feelings right now. Like I think it's been an exhausting year for so many of us. But I think it's going to be really hard because teenagers are just missing out on so much right now. So maybe, I would say same for parents, same for everybody, prioritize your mental health, but also make room for some of that, like really, really big grief or big loss, those feelings. Cause I'm sure that they're there. Mm-hmm. So maybe you can bring it up or just talk about it. But make sure, let's see if we can make more room for it. I would tell any teenager out there that it's okay to not be okay.
That things like TikTok that get a terrible name. Well, guess what? Kids all over the place are getting exercise in communal ways and exercising their brain at the same time while connecting with one another in ways that make them happy through TikTok. So I think there are ways that you can combat that isolation. I mean, uncertainty causes anxiety. I mean, we all like to have some sense of control and some knowledge and some predictability. And more than anything, what this pandemic has required from us is sort of suspending our normal rhythms and doing things entirely differently, and not knowing exactly when that's going to end and what it's going to look like next. Now, I do think we are transitioning for many in developed countries to a place where we do have an end in sight, and we know that this is not the new normal forever. This is a new normal for a period of time. But for a while, it's been highly uncertain and required incredible flexibility from folks.
Hello. I'm Samuel Collins. I'm 17 years old. I'm from the US, but for the past 2 years, I've been attending high school in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, and before that in Baku, Azerbaijan. And currently, I'm quarantined with my family. I do feel that I'm missing out on some things because of social distancing and quarantine, mainly because the pandemic required me and my family to relocate back to the US. So I'm definitely, had to move away from my friends and from school. And I missed out on my high school graduation, which I had to attend online. And additionally, I'll definitely probably miss out on some things that would be considered a typical university experience because of the pandemic. I'll likely have a lot of online classes, or won't have roommates and stuff like that.
Hi, I'm Nadia. I am 16. I'm turning 17 in July. I'm currently living in Singapore, and I'm quarantining with my family. I do feel like I missed out on some social interactions. So when we were in quarantine, just for information, we're in phase 2 now. So phase 2 started 2 days ago. So you're allowed to meet in a group of 5 people. Restaurants are reopening, so are shops and things like that. So we were able to go to a friend's house for dinner yesterday, which was really nice. And our school opened, I think, 2 weeks ago. But there's like social distancing measures and like pretty harsh measures in place at school. But yeah, when we were like hardcore in quarantine, like you're not allowed to go out unless you're buying food, I really do think that social interaction was where I was missing out. Like I missed talking to my friends about things. And when I was doing online lessons, I would FaceTime my friends just so we would like be able to see each other during class and like talk. So that helped a little bit, but it's obviously not the same. So I think the hardest part about being in quarantine was the fact that I couldn't see my friends, and that I wasn't spending as much time as I would with them. Also, in terms of missing out, I was supposed to go on an expedition. Like, I had this amazing opportunity from school to go on an expedition to Madagascar, and we would have left like last week for that, so that would have been an incredible experience. So I missed out on that, unfortunately, and my musical that we were supposed to be doing last weekend, we would have actually performed it, that has also been canceled. I mean, it's been postponed, but it's not the same because some people are leaving, and then it's a whole thing. So I think that is what I really find hard about this COVID situation, that a lot of things, and like the 12th graders at my school didn't really get a graduation. I mean, they were lucky enough that they were able to graduate in school and like get their diploma and things like that. I mean, some people around the world have graduated online, which is terrible. So I really think that that's like what like people are missing out on experiences, which is the worst thing. I think the best thing about quarantine was that I had time to do other things that I've been wanting to do for a long time, and also I was able to get up for school an hour later. So usually I get up at like 6:15, and in quarantine I got up at like 7:20, which is not that much, but I mean, an hour more sleep is definitely beneficial. Also, for all my free periods, I was able to relax in my room or like get work done in the comfort of my own home, and the lunches were obviously better. But yeah, definitely, like, I was able to start a bunch of things. So I'm doing like this online class, like this free online class from Harvard, I think. Yeah, Harvard, and it's really interesting. And I also have been reading a lot more books. I've been able to work on practicing my instruments and like work on my music a little bit more. So I definitely missed going to school, which is very weird, I guess, because school is not really the funnest place to be, especially in the last years of high school when we have exams like every couple weeks.
How I'm taking care of myself is I'm eating at lunch, which is something I didn't do at school, which sounds bad, but it's because lunch was at like 10 o'clock and I just wasn't hungry at the time, because on weekends that's when I wake up. And then working out, I'm also able to pay attention to how healthy I eat, because I have time to make sure that I eat something that's not garbage. It's kind of boring, because if you're following the precautions like you're supposed to, you're inside almost all the time. You can't see your friends, and you're just doing all of this online work without having your peers or like teachers there, so it's no socializing really except for your family. So it's kind of boring, but I mean, I guess it's okay. You have a lot of time to do stuff. You can pick up a hobby. It's not that bad. I feel like I was able to spend more time on things that I like, because school can be done so much quicker, because like I'm given a list of assignments, I do them, I'm done very early, and then there's no homework. I've been doing a lot more painting, which I didn't have time for before. I am able to read a lot more, which is so great. And I'm able to work out, which I didn't have the motivation to do before, or nor the time, so it's very great, I guess. It's something I want to do for a while now, and now I have the time to do it, so that's some good that's come out of this.
Hi, I'm Julia Wallowitz. I'm 17 years old. I'm currently quarantined with my family in Overland Park, Kansas. Sometimes I do feel like I'm missing out because of social distancing and quarantine, but I also, on the other side, I know my friends are feeling the same way, and we're all kind of sharing these emotions, and it makes me feel less alone even when I just am alone in my house. I know that there are others feeling the same way. The best thing for me personally that has come out during the pandemic was just taking time to breathe. My schedule's usually pretty full, and there's no time to just like sit back and analyze, life. And quarantine has definitely given me a lot of time to do that. I'm kind of surprised that I miss school. I think it's just seeing my friends and running around lunch and just talking about random stuff and just, having that human interaction and seeing someone and look at them in the eyes and just have a conversation with them. That being said, I don't miss the schoolwork that comes with school. Since we went online for the end of spring semester, it's really lightened up the coursework and made junior year really easy to finish off strong. So that was really great.
Hi, my name is Helena Eikenberry. I'm 16. I'm from DC and I'm currently quarantining with my mom, my dad, my dog, and my cat. So very lonely over here. I do feel like I'm missing out on a lot of things because of this. Since the weather has been so nice, I'm like, I should be out like hanging out with my friends, going to parks, like going to see cool things, going to cool places. Our prom was canceled, which I was looking forward to. So in that way, I think I am missing out on some things. I feel like I had all these expectations for how junior year was going to go, and that is exactly the opposite of what is happening right now. One of the things I missed that surprises me is time away from my parents. Because right now, I'm just always with them, 24/7. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, I'm with them, and my pets, but that doesn't really count. So I've really missed being able to see and interact with other people. I feel like I'm gonna come out of this with no social skills whatsoever. One thing I haven't missed is actually going to the school building. I've been able to adjust pretty quickly to the online learning, and my school's been super organized. And so I thought I would miss physically going to school a lot, but it's actually been fine. I sleep in for 2 extra hours. I do work on my own time, my own schedule. And I'm able to make, my schedule just super flexible. So that is one thing I have not missed. So I've been going on a lot of bike rides and finding a lot of really cool bike trails around DC, which has been awesome. Or I'll go on a walk or a run, or maybe do a workout circuit in my backyard. So anything just to get outside, because the first couple of weeks of quarantine, I was going for days without leaving the house, which was not good for my mental health. So I just need to find a way every day just to get out, which has been kind of hard because when it's nice weather outside, it's very crowded outside in DC. So people are not completely adhering to the lockdown rules. So it does get quite crowded, which is hard when I'm biking or running just to avoid people and stay around 6 feet apart.
I have more time to explore my interests because I can actually cook now and I can try new recipes, and I really love cooking, and almost I think every day I've been trying out really long, complicated recipes that take for some people an hour isn't long, but for me that does take a long time, because when I had school I could only bake really on Saturday, and even then I'd have to fit in a recipe into an hour, maybe a half hour, and then I'd go back to doing homework. But now I can do these really complicated recipes, and that just makes me so happy, and I think that's what's happened. And I've also had time to look at colleges, which is really beneficial for my future because I did not have time to do that earlier. But I don't miss school. I think the only thing I miss from school is seeing my friends, but I don't miss the teachers at all. I don't miss any of my teachers, even though I don't dislike them. I like them, they're good teachers, but I don't miss them. I don't miss their teaching. I don't miss any lectures. I guess that kind of surprised me. I thought I would miss school a little bit more, but I really don't. I am so happy I don't have to go to school. I think especially where I live in Washington State, I think it looks like this. You spend a lot of time on social media, and you spend a lot of time stressed out over your future, a lot of time studying. I think especially for us, since the job market is so competitive, we always have to find ways to stand out for our college apps, and we always have to like tweak parts of ourselves and parts of, you know, are we doing enough extracurriculars? Is this competitive enough? Is this interesting enough? And I don't really know if a teenager in 2020 is really doing all of that for themselves. They're doing it more so for the colleges. And I think part of being a teenager in 2020 is you're not doing things for yourself anymore. You're doing it to look good for schools, for universities, for colleges, to impress people in sports, to impress scouts. I don't know if that's the right word. And a lot of it is also spent, I would say, being insecure. Like, a lot of my friends talk about this, like they look through social media and they just feel really bad about themselves.
I feel like I'm missing out on everything and anything, you know, like things that, you know, everyone takes advantage of. So probably my friends, just giving them a hug, or, you know, walking to the train, taking the train, which is the most disgusting place on this earth, but I miss it so much. Going to a restaurant, getting a sandwich from my deli, getting an iced coffee before I walk into first period all grumpy, things like that. Going out on a Saturday night. Oh my gosh. What good has come out of this pandemic? I think I have learned a lot about myself, and I get to experience all this downtime, which I've never had. Yeah, I think that I've been super creative in, you know, music, school. The thing that I complain about probably the most on a daily basis without Corona, I am missing so much right now. I'm trying my best to stay optimistic, although, man, I just feel like I haven't heard some good news in a minute. I just feel like sometimes there's never gonna be an end, and this is what I'm gonna have to deal with. And it's a little scary considering that I'm gonna be a junior next year, and I didn't really get to finish my sophomore year, and I'm a little nervous because junior year has all these, you know, there's all this pressure put on it, and I'm a little scared that I'm unprepared, but, well, we shall see. This is not a forever thing.
Life for me right now is just one big blur, I guess. I just do my homework, clean my room, and then go to bed and do the same thing every day. Do I feel like I'm missing out on something because of social distancing? Yes, because especially since it's summer, I'm supposed to be doing all these fun things with my friends.
But no, I don't feel like I'm missing too much, just like sports and stuff, because right now we would be getting ready with volleyball and everything, so definitely sports. I would say one thing good that's came out is that I'm really close to my family now, like, or I've gotten closer because I've been around them more and everything. I'm not like always at work or always at school or whatever. School. I miss school, and I don't like school, but I miss school. What does it look like being a teen in 2020? It sucks. It's not fun. It's really not. How are you taking care of yourself? Getting the rest I need. Like, I can actually get a decent amount of hours of sleep. I can do skincare, like all that type of stuff, so really well. Easiest part of isolation, sleeping, by far. Hardest part, not seeing that many people. Like, I'm a people person. I like going to the mall or like people watching, so that's the hardest part because I like being out.
I still like to make sure I get a good amount of exercise every day, because from going to the school year doing, you know, after school activities and sports to going to none is a really big change. And I'm trying to also see what I eat. I'm trying to eat healthy so it won't affect me. Well, in terms of schoolwork, I think I like being independent and being in my room and knowing that I have my whole day is planned by me. So it depends, if I want to get my schoolwork done right after school, I'll have more time. So I like the fact that I'm independent of my own schedule.
So, how do we learn about the teenage brain in isolation? It's difficult because it's unethical to put a teenager in a room alone and just measure what happens for weeks, months, even years. So we don't have any direct research like that, but there are a few different ways we can puzzle together the mystery of the teenage brain in isolation. First, there's what we have so far from the pandemic, the research that's been done during the past year and a half or so. Two, there's research on adults, specifically adults in solitary confinement and what happens to the brain then, which is obviously different than social distancing, but again, we're piecing this all together. And then two, there's animal studies, most notably that of mice. And the mice brain works pretty similar to that of humans in that they are reliant on peers when they're in the adolescent stage of development. So we've been able to, scientists and researchers have been able to study what happens when a mouse is separated from all of its peers and really members of its little mice community. According to the CDC, as of March 2021, COVID-related fatalities in people 18 or younger was 0.05% of the total population that has died from COVID-19. A major aspect of adolescence is self-autonomy, learning what it means to be a person in this world, understanding yourself better, understanding how that impacts the world, and vice versa. A lot of that has to do with this idea of leaving the nest a little bit, and often we see throughout adolescence slowly a gain in responsibility, learning new things about being a functioning person in the world. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, a lot of that hasn't happened, or at least it's transformed drastically. Instead of being able to, go stay somewhere for a while or stay home without your parents, people have spent the past year and a half at home with their parents, for example, and didn't have that same opportunity to sort of leave the nest a little bit, grow a little bit more, learn what it meant to be an independent person functioning in the world. Now, we're not sure how that's going to impact things in the long term. For example, what does that look like when the class of 2020 and the class of 2021 are going off to college, and after spending, a year and a half, almost 2 years, in some cases, at home with just their parents? What is that going to look like when they're, all of a sudden moving potentially across the country, sometimes even to different countries? How is that going to impact teenagers and those experiences? And a lot of the answer to that is that we just don't know yet, which is part of the fear that came with COVID and the psychology of teenagers in general. Additionally, adolescence is a time of increased diagnoses and mental health related problems. A lot of mental health issues begin during adolescence, or at least begin to be diagnosed during adolescence. So there's already added stress and increase in mental diagnosis during this time period. What happens when, in addition to that, you have extreme stressors added to it, such as COVID-19 pandemic? The COVID pandemic is a trauma event. How does the teenage brain address such trauma? What does it look like to be a teenager moving through such a scary world? The COVID-19 pandemic added stressors and reduced the amount of coping mechanisms teenagers had already developed, whether that be hanging out with friends, going to sports games, going to church potentially. All of these things were no longer viable options, or they were sort of halfway there. You're doing online school, you can go on Instagram, but you can't actually see your friends. So teenagers had all this stress added onto them, but without as many resources and tools to deal with this stress.